Hello and welcome to today's panel discussion titled Mobility Mentoring and Supportive Housing Programs. My name is Sandra Clermy and I will be the moderator for today's conversation. Before we get started, I would like to welcome everyone tuning in to today's conversation. We are excited to be joined by current partners and others who are just learning about our work. Since this might be the first time you are meeting us, I wanted to share some key pieces of information. First, today we'll be talking about how mobility mentoring, Empath's holistic coaching model, has been implemented in supportive housing programs. Mobility mentoring is defined as the professional practice of partnering with participants so that over time they may acquire the resources, skills, and sustained behavior changes necessary to attain and preserve their economic independence. The model has four essential elements: coaching for mobility, coaching for economic mobility, the bridge to self-sufficiency, goal setting, and recognition. Throughout today's conversation, we will talk more about the model and its elements. I also wanted to share a bit about, I also wanted to share a bit about the Economic Mobility Exchange at Empath. The Exchange is a membership network for practitioners and professionals working to promote economic mobility in their own communities. Located across the globe, member organizations come from every sector: nonprofits, public agencies, and multi-service organizations. Everyone on this panel is a member of our exchange. Over the next hour, I want to encourage all those tuning in to submit questions to the panel through the Q&A box. Now let's get started. I would like to now go ahead and welcome all of our panelists to today's conversation. Today, we are joined by Leslie Bailey from Warren Village in Westminster, Colorado, David Cooper and Janine Adrian from the Brisbane Center in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and Charmaine Lujarez from Empath in Boston, Massachusetts. So we'll begin with introductions, followed by an opening question for all of our panelists. I will start by introducing myself, followed by Leslie Bailey, then David Cooper, Janine Adrian, and Charmaine Lujarez. So my name is Sandra Clermy. I am the director of the Supportive Housing Shelter Programs at Empath. I have a bachelor's degree in computer science and have been with Empath for a little over 8 years, but working in the shelter system in the city of Boston for over 15 years. Our programs are in the inner city neighborhoods of Boston, where we partner with our program participants to provide mobility mentoring and housing placement services by developing personalized mobility goals focused on obtaining and maintaining permanent housing, achieving increased employment, continuing education, financial stability, family self-sufficiency, and overall well-being. My start at Empath was as a case manager, where I directly observed and participated in the implementing, integration, and accession of mobility mentoring services in the shelter programs. As mobility mentoring coaches, we are partnering in a helping relationship with our participants that promotes growth in key areas of their lives. Our ability to continue providing mobility mentoring services during this pandemic with continued participant successes speaks of the efficacy of the mobility mentoring platform. So let's welcome our panelists. Leslie, can you share a bit about your organization and the work you're doing? And also tell us about the affordable housing landscape and what a livable wage looks like in your service area.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much, Sandy. So my name is Leslie Bailey, and I am a licensed social worker. We are at Warren Village, a self-sufficiency housing program. We have 2 locations, actually. Our main campus is in Denver, but we do have a satellite second location in Westminster. So if you were looking for us on the internet, you would find Denver as a primary and our First Step housing in Westminster. A little bit about myself. I have been with Warren Village for, going on probably about 4 years, not including my start there, which was an intern while I was in graduate school. I was pulled on then to be a family advocate, and my role is also the workforce services manager. So we all at Warren Village, the advocates, have a dual role of doing sort of case management as well as a specialty area. So we are a 6-story residential housing, we're housing and self-sufficiency. So what that looks like for us, and we're kind of a unique model, especially in this particular area, is we provide, we have a learning center downstairs for childcare for our residents to access and the public as well. About 92 units, and we serve single parent families in Denver. So the only criteria for applicants is that they have custody of at least one child. We have some program requirements too. We ask our residents who move in to be in a full-time activity of school or work or both, as well as engage in some life skills classes that we offer for free. And we include childcare and meet with their case managers at least once a month so that we can kind of work on these goal setting things that we're going to talk about today. In terms of the housing landscape and the affordable housing landscape in Denver, so my most recent data is a couple years old. We get our self-sufficiency data from an agency called, Center for Colorado Center on Law and Policy, and they work with the Center for Women's Welfare at the University of Washington and do a self-sufficiency report every 2 years. So what we know right now is that if a single individual in Denver needs to make about $14.50 for a self-sufficient wage, that's still about $4 short from actually being able to afford rent in Denver. And when you add a child to that, the need for self-sufficiency doubles to about $29 an hour in order to be able to provide for both yourself and your child without the need for government subsidies and other benefits. And while Denver does have a mix of affordable housing and tax credit properties and things like that, the most recent data shows that we are about 15,000 units short in terms of affordable housing for the population that is low enough income that would require some sort of subsidy. And the last thing is our residents stay about 2 to 3 years with us, and they work on usually completing a degree and trying to get over that cliff effect.
Thank you. David? David Cooper, same question. Can you share a little bit about your organization and the
Thank
work
you.
you're doing?
I'll unmute myself so we could all hear. Good afternoon, David Cooper. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Thurman Brisbane Center, Fredericksburg. We're an 80-bed shelter. We serve both single females, single males, as well as families. We have a 8-unit family wing that serves currently up to 24 family members. But during non-COVID times, up to 80 members in the entire facility. We've been around for 33 years. Organization, this current location, has been here for about 16 years. So we serve 4 counties and the city of Planning District 16 in Virginia. Last year, we served about 550 individuals. About 90 of those are children. So a little bit about my background. My formal trainings in social work, in theology and nonprofit management, with a former career in construction administration and management. So that's a little bit about what I bring to the organization. Relative to affordable housing in the community, let me first give you a couple of numbers for folks that are in the shelter. They typically stay in the shelter for about 55 to as much as 120 days, although we have up to 270 days that we can house folks here. Their income average at entry is a little over $600 a month individual. Once they are prepared to exit, about $1,500 a month. Compare and contrast that with the livable wage in the community, which is about $31.35 an hour. So to be able to afford a single bedroom apartment here in the community using 30% of your wages, you need to make about $64,000 a year just to be able to afford that. As you can see, there's quite a disparity of numbers. The shelter operates mostly as just a shelter, but with supportive services, much like the way shelters operated some years ago, with services that equip folks for exit so they can have some of the tools to work with upon exit. However, like I heard Leslie say, here also we have the challenge of limited affordable housing, limited access to affordable housing. 2 of our counties have more affordable housing, but not that much more affordable. However, there's limited public transit to get to those counties. So that's a little bit about the atmosphere here, the work we've done in the shelter. And I'm just delighted to say that we've been serving as a bridge to self-sufficiency here using the Empath Mobility Mentoring coaching model for, I guess, almost 2 years now. So we launched it here. We're one of 3 organizations in the state of Virginia using that model. Delighted to do so.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, David. Janine?
Hi, so my name is Janine Adrian. I'm the program manager for mobility mentoring here at the Thurman Brisbane Center. Part of my background is I have a master's in community counseling psychology and a master's in public administration. To speak a little bit about our affordable housing network in this area, the median income, as Jay was saying, is about $66,000 for family, and a 1-bedroom apartment ranges from anywhere from $1,200 to $1,500, which is, of course, much less than affordable for many of our residents.
Thank you. Thank you, Janine. Charmaine?
So good afternoon, all. So it's a pleasure to be part of this conversation. My name is Charmaine Maparas. I'm currently the director of our Whittier Choice project at Empath and working alongside a team of 5 mentors. I've been with Empath for about 10 years. So to give some context and background, the Whittier Choice project is in partnership with the Housing and Urban Development, so HUD, and Boston Housing Authority. It's a 5-year partnership that allows us the privilege to work with approximately 200 households, almost 500 residents in the Roxbury community of Boston, specifically with the Whittier Public Housing Site that was built in 1954. So the Choice Project is really focused on revitalizing distressed public housing sites and its surrounding neighborhood so that residents live in like well-managed, newer developed buildings and having access to revamped community spaces and revitalized businesses. And so we deliver mobility mentoring services to the residents of Whittier Public Housing during this period of development and construction. So in regards to affordability and living wage, so Boston has many pockets of cities. And so in using our bridge to self-sufficiency, the highest tier that we say is that a living wage is about 80% of the AMI. So for a family of 2, that's about $72,000. And so the perspective that I want to bring is based on the observation and feedback that our staff and our participants are saying. So to understand affordability and finding affordable homes, you also have to understand the location of where the site is. So Whittier Choice Project is in Roxbury. It's central in Boston. It's a very busy but resourceful community that's surrounded by great resources. So transportation is like 10 minutes away, buses, trains, there's colleges in the area. So Northeastern is literally across the way. There's hospitals, tourist sites. Because of its centrality, you can imagine competition is really hard to where they are right now for our families. So finding affordable homes and finding affordable places to own or rent is competitive in this particular region. But I do want to bring a highlight to say that part of the Choice Project is to make sure that the families who live in this community can stay in this community. So one of our colleagues on this partner of this project basically mentioned to me that in the next 24 months, there will be significant growth in affordable homes in Boston of between 400 to 500 units. And they would like to make sure that there's incentives built to keep our residents there by allowing down payment assistance of up to $70,000. And during this period of development, all of our residents have a right to return to the neighborhood. So part of the development of this project is maintaining existing affordable units and making sure that we build more. So there's certainly work, there's highlights for this particular project that I'm on.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists for sharing the work that you're doing using mobility mentoring for this very needed work, helping our families to attain a level of self-sufficiency. So everyone on this panel uses the Bridge to Self-Sufficiency, Empath self-assessment tool and component of mobility mentoring. As a holistic tool that not only assesses housing needs, but more. David, Charmaine, and Leslie, Can you tell us about your experience with the bridge assessment and what has been the responses from your participants and staff? David?
Sure, thank you. So basically, from my construction background, it's really a nice metaphor because folks are building a bridge. They start with the foundation and continue to build upwards, destination home. So ideally, it's been a great metaphor for us to be able to use that bridge. And when we use that with our folks, both our mentors as well as our mentees, our coach mentors, mentees, they kind of get it. I mean, they see the image of what it takes to build, and they look at some of those 5 foundations that are essential, and they look at building along with the scoring that goes with that. It's a fairly simplified way for folks to begin to conceptualize what that means. Okay.
Part of how we use the bridge assessment is that we also are able to discuss what some of these housing needs are with the clients that we serve. And we're also able to not only just use that visualization, but to speak to them, like, what does this mean to you? And what do you think this looks like in practice? How would you implement this?
Thank you. Leslie?
Sure, yes. I would agree that those are certainly benefits that we have as well. And we've seen that in our program. To add on to that, I would say that it's been nice. I think the visual tool and the metaphor and understanding the bridge and sort of getting from point A to point B. So while you climb the ladder, we're discussing and describing, increasing stability. It's also really helpful for them to visualize and just sort of see like how the pillars do work together, how stability in one area is more likely to maybe bring up stability in another area, and how the more stability that you have across all areas, the easier the road is to get from, where you are now to the destination or sort of that goal. So it has been very helpful for us in that way as well.
And Charmaine.
To add to everybody's sort of comments there, I'd like to also, for me and my team, we like that it's a very non-traditional sort of assessment model that allows for bi-directional conversation, right? So it's not just about me asking all these questions. I'm involving the participant in the process of their planning and just getting to know them authentically. And I think that's the word I really appreciate, which is an authentic conversation is allowed and sort of given in this space. And for my staff, I think overall, when I ask them how has it been, they say it's fun, right? And so that's why I think it's different for a lot of our participants. There's a fun atmosphere that can be implemented because it is a conversation that is happening between 2 people. And my staff can come to the table to add their style to this process of collecting information in a really new way. So both people, I feel, have the opportunity to be a little bit more themselves in the process.
Thank you. So from what I'm hearing from everyone is that this the bridge assessment is a visual tool that helps to engage the participant in conversation and also gives them autonomy over the decisions that they're making in the process of creating these goals. This is great. So this question is for Brisbane and Warren Village. How did you prepare your staff to use this tool, this holistic tool? And since the bridge includes 5 different areas of someone's life, how do you prepare your coaches to speak to these different domains?
Well, one thing that we do uniquely at the Brisbane Center is that we have volunteer mentors. So we train our volunteer mentors. We have 2-part training for them. We also provide them the handbook that utilizes a lot of the goal setting. David, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, one of the things that I like about it is that, like Charmaine was saying, is that it's an integrated element. It requires all of these 5 different domains to move toward full success. So it's getting people to think outside of the silo, outside of one particular focus, that there are a number of elements that go together. We also use the goal setting instruments from the Empath Handbook. So to help people begin to think practically about how do you build this bridge and what are the elements that go into it. And then also to use that metaphor and to help people to think about the steps as they move forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, we actually, I think all three of us have sort of different people that are actually using these tools. So at Warren Village, you know, there are about 6 of us advocates, 1 for each floor. Most of the advocates, so we're paid staff who actually had these tools sort of brought in, and we had this kind of last year and a half, I guess. We piloted a little bit before then. So we've got about a year's worth of pilot data to really integrate this. And I think that our staff leaned into it very well. So having had some master's level training, you know, there was the experience already of some motivational interviewing skills, which I think that we were all really excited about, just sort of being able to incorporate, like, how, yes, these tools fit very well into that motivational interviewing stuff. And really, like Charmaine said, bring autonomy and really make this conversation very client focused, which is definitely our approach. So that's been very helpful. We've had a good response, I believe, and interactions from our residents as well. So when we piloted this, we just recently did a resident survey for all sorts of things. And so we incorporated some questions about how they felt about the introduction of these tools. And with about 76 respondents to the question, you know, do you feel like the bridge and these tools have been helpful? About 85% said yes, you know, these tools are helpful. And we hear that in case management too. We get a lot of feedback and responses. Sometimes we'll set up usually the first goal setting always by doing it alongside the resident. But we've noticed too, like the more that we do goal setting, the more independent our residents can become on actually really knowing exactly how to do it themselves, which is actually also a really fun thing to see. So it's nice to see sort of the progression as people gain more experience with these tools.
This is awesome. This is awesome. So what I'm hearing is that for everyone, that training and practice for both mobility mentors and the coach, for the mobility mentor coaches as well as the participants, is what makes the tools effective, right? And the more they practice, the more they use, the more independent they become. Now, before we move on to our next question, I just want to check and see if we have any questions in the Q&A box.
Yeah, definitely. So I do have a question coming in for, it has to do with a short-term program. So I'm just going to read it, and this might be, well, we'll see who wants to respond. So when the service timeline is short-term, how does that implementation of the mobility bridge look, as opposed to a long-term program, you know, 2 years or more, where more time is, you know, allowed to establish relationships? So yeah, so just kind of wanting to hear about a more short-term experience.
Yeah, this is Dave. Just briefly, I'll state that not only do we engage with folks, first of all, folks that are coming into the shelter stabilize for 30 days before we ever even begin to talk about mobility mentoring. And then as we move beyond that, if there's some stability, we'll engage with a mobility mentor and a mentee. But then they'll follow, once they exit the shelter, we follow them for 12 plus months after they exit. So after they moved into housing, the mentor-mentee relationship continues for 12 months. So theoretically, we could have as much as 18 months worth of connection between a coach and a coached individual. Ideally, we've got some coaches now that have been working for over 2 years with folks. And so that's beyond the limits of our programming, but that's how we manage that here. It's beyond just.
So that's great. This shows that, so what I'm hearing is that for the short-term programs, you're offering what's called, what we refer to as the stabilization services after they move into permanent housing, where you can continue to use the mobility mentoring tools and resources to continue to work and make movement along the bridge. I think we have more questions.
Yeah, definitely. We have another question, and this is about the nuts and bolts of the housing piece. So how do you balance the nuts and bolts of the housing piece with the mobility mentoring relationship? Are those handled by different staff or the same?
Well, at Empath, the housing piece is handled by both mobility mentors and what we refer to as housing placement specialists. We work hand in hand. We form like a support group of mentors and housing placement providers so that we can create the best plan for permanent placement for our participants. All mentors are trained, whether it's housing placement or mobility mentors or program mentors, we're all trained on the mobility mentoring platform. So we're all giving the same information. We're able to support each other with the same resources and guides.
And I can answer that as well too. For our particular agency, we have to, it depends on what you mean by nuts and bolts, but the current residents and their housing needs is actually handled, the nuts and bolts of that is handled by a housing department, separate staff from the family advocates who are doing that more mentoring and coaching role, which is really helpful. But then we also have a special, one of the advocates whose specialty area is in next step housing and what comes after. And so we do have the clinician, the mentor that is actually specializing in how to help all of the residents plan to understand the sort of the housing landscape and where they're going to live after Warren Village. But then we have that other separate housing staff that I think is actually helpful for our roles to have that separated.
Yeah, here in Fredericksburg, one of our challenges is we've been working with the continuum of care in placement into rapid rehousing, housing first. However, there's insufficient housing stock. So only about 1% of our folks end up availing themselves of that particular housing stock. So ideally, they have housing coordinators that are working just limited housing stock. So our mobility mentors would continue to work with folks, coaching them, connecting them with external resources as they move into more permanent housing.
Thank you. I think I saw another question about supportive housing, permanent supportive housing programs.
Yes, so I will say we have lots of questions, so this is excellent. So the next question or another question would be, how have the panelists adapted the tool to reflect the needs of the clients they work with? Are there any adaptations that specifically speak to being in permanent supportive housing?
Well, we do have, in my department, we do have a permanent housing program where we have a apartment building housing 11 1- and 2-bedroom apartments, and we do continue with mobility mentoring services there. The method has not changed. We just continue to work on goals. A lot of the goals will be to increase their income so that they can qualify for more sustainable housing, some tenants rather have also pursued home ownership through mobility mentoring, creating goals to purchase their own home. So we continue to use the same tools and the same resources. We still will tap into the housing placement department for resources for housing and continue to do the work with the tenants.
I can also add to the adaptation of tools. And so just as a reminder from my introduction of choice, we are expected to serve 200 households. That's about 500 residents. And they are technically in a way stable in that they have permanent housing. You can imagine we are a workforce development program, but by serving 200 families, we actually have to serve all demographics. So single, able-bodied, someone could be 65, someone could be a youth. We still have to provide services to children. So actually our net is really wide. And contractually, our obligation is to provide service to everyone, even if they don't necessarily want it. We still have to offer everything that we're doing to everybody. And so I'll say that similarities of our approach is that our coaching elements remain the same. So we still do utilize the tools. We're always very careful about our trauma-informed approach, like unconditional positive regard, everything that supports the emphasis of relationship and rapport building. I will say where we've had to shift is the use of the tool for those who are, let's say, not really at a place of wanting to work, perhaps because like they're a senior citizen. So we really had to do some work on the back end as a team to think about, okay, the conversation of these elements remain the same. Housing stability is still really important. Social connection is really important. Finances, education could be learning and employment. That we do still have seniors who are technically wanting to work, right? So I think the conversation remains the same. We've just had to shift in thinking what are the right questions to ask in these particular pillars. The challenge we also have with this particular demographic is that there are cognitive limitations. So if a senior citizen has Alzheimer's or dementia, we had to really recognize that that's a limitation on our end. And so expertise needed to be brought in. So we may not be able to provide a service directly in terms of coaching, but we can build more scaffolding, and we can find people in our community who can support this particular population. We also work with youth, and what we found is obviously some of those bridge context doesn't really apply. So like they don't pay rent, right? They may not, they're all technically, depending on how young they are, they're not necessarily working right now. But again, we look at it as what types of questions can we ask in each of these pillars? So we still have a very holistic conversation with each demographic. We just have to change the approach and the types of questions that we might bring to the table. So for our youth, it's, okay, let's talk about education. What are your aspirations? What interests do you have? Career, let's talk about volunteering. Or if we're talking about family stability, you're in this place of transition. How are you feeling about that? Do you like your neighborhood? What do you wish was different, right? So we do try to maintain the integrity of mobility mentoring. We just have to change and shift some of the ways that we approach the questioning and the use of the model for depending on the demographic we're serving.
Thank you, Charmaine. You've answered the question that I was going to ask you regarding how the model may have changed or evolved to support your current project at Whittier Street, and the core pieces that have remained consistent and where you had to adapt. So thank you for your response. So I will just move on to the next question and ask everyone. One of the 4 essential elements of mobility mentoring is recognition. Can you tell us a bit more about what recognition looks like in your program, starting with Brisbane and then Warren Village and Empath?
Yeah, thank you. I'll start off and then pass it over to Janine. So here we think in terms of certificates, we think in terms of celebration and of cards in terms of gift cards. So we want to try to minimize extrinsic motivators. We're looking for intrinsic motivation, something that comes from within here and within here. What do we really like to do? What are we so happy about that we're going to keep building on this? That's one of the reasons we use the Rosenberg self-esteem scale to determine someone's motivation, someone's verve, their drive toward moving in that positive direction. So again, certificates, cards, celebration.
All right, to piggyback off of that, I have spoken to some of our previous mentors that mentioned that certificate to a lot of the mentees that I work with, that is like the equivalent of any type of diploma or anything else. They are so excited just to receive that certificate that they were able to follow through with this program, that really has become a really large incentive for a lot of our participants, just that certificate. Something tangible to show that they were able to complete this whole process and follow through with that.
That's interesting. We have a very different approach in terms of like how recognition sort of shows up when we're using the goal action plans with our residents. And so, we attempt to do, at the moment, we've been doing 4 goal action plans per resident per year. And each action step actually has this built-in piece for recognition. And actually is one of the more difficult things, I think, for our staff to wrap our heads around. How do we really think about recognizing and giving credit for all these tiny little steps. But as we've grown and adapted this particular part, I think that the thing that stands out is really helping sort of rewire those neural pathways to giving yourself credit, being creative about the way that you're going to acknowledge and give yourself some positive feedback and positive thoughts about what you accomplished. For our single parent families that are working and really overstretched with barriers, it's so easy to just see this endless to-do list and this endless, like, I'm never going to be completely done. I'm never really going to accomplish this thing. There's always going to be one other thing. And so this has been, and recognition has been a moment for us to pause in case management and say, look what you did. I know that it seems like that's insignificant, but it's not. And the more that there is this replication of positive reinforcement and feedback and positive messaging around even the smaller things that seem less significant to the resident, the more likely it is that they're going to build on that. So I think we've certainly seen that. We've also been able to use this as a way to reframe self-care and really say it, for us, for a minute, it was like, oh, are you going to recognize by going out to dinner and spending money? Well, not when the goal is about saving money, right? And so it's been really nice to say, you know, recognition could be when you accomplish this task, call me so I can help celebrate with you. Call your family members, right? There are people on your team that are really rooting for you to accomplish these goals. And so we've been able to reframe self-care and find opportunities to really allow people to sort of brag about what they've accomplished. So that's been kind of a different for us.
I will just add to all of that. One thing that we've also done we have a newsletter in Choice where we do collective sort of success. So like if as a collective, the Choice program, we saw momentum in like credit scores going up or people saving or like attending a series session and completing it, we will put that in the newsletter. And part of that reason is because, again, the wide net of the people that we serve, it's hard to sort of celebrate 200 families, right? So the newsletter allows us to collectively share that information with everybody broadly. But I definitely agree with David and Leslie and Janine about celebration, personal recognition. We do in sort of session when we have mobility mentoring sessions to review goals. So in the moment recognition of that efforts, verbal appreciation, texting as well now, especially with COVID. We do a lot of that outreach.
Great. So overall, we're using multiple methods of recognition in our programs, not only recognizing the goal attainment, but also recognizing the action steps, attaining the goals and the action steps, which is great, so that we're building intrinsic motivation and also rewiring the brain to new pathways to self-care. So that's really good information. So now we're going to switch the topic to engagement with participants, right? And this question is for Brisbane and Warren Village. From prior conversations, the theme of accountability was brought up several times. Can you speak more to why you see accountability as part of your relationships with your participants? And what role does this play in the success of your programs?
Yes. So from our perspective, accountability to self for one's goals is important. Accountability collectively for the well-being, for the common well-being, not only of the individual, but the group and the community. So accountability for us has to do with someone's drive towards success. It has to do with accountability to their goal action plan. Did you achieve those goals? If not, I wonder what might be an opportunity to amend that, to take a different look at how you might achieve those goals. So some motivational interviewing, some appreciative inquiry questioning, but helping folks to be accountable to their own plan so that they can make progress, and then to also deal with some disappointments along the way so that they can learn from those disappointments and grow.
Not only that, but since we do work with the volunteer as well, it's also we're not working with somebody that has this as a paid position that has an entire caseload. So we really try to shepherd, advocate, and make sure that these relationships are being built so that nobody's time is being wasted. And that's part of that accountability and making sure that these goals that we're setting up are very specific to the residents, very specific to their needs, so that they do have that buy-in to it, and these are things that they want to accomplish for themselves. And in turn, it makes them more accountable when they are able to participate in the plan, like we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I want to add to that too. Thank you, Janine. But yeah, I think when you think in terms of coaching, it is the coach helping the individual to be accountable to their own goals. It's not trying to get the coached individual, the participant, to be accountable to the goals that are set by a coach, mentor. And so that's the differentiation that we work through in our training to help folks set appropriate boundaries so that there's not some mixed approach to accountability. It's not others being accountable to my plan, but it's about them being accountable to their own plans.
Leslie?
Well, Sandra, we actually don't really use the word accountability very much in our program. Our program, our thing is really more about readiness for change. So it's sort of maybe a difference between like the way that our residents enter our program, apply voluntarily. We're really trying to be very clear with our applicants about what's going to be expected of them upon move-in. So our process is pretty rigorous and lengthy, honestly, for those who are applying to be into our program, especially because, as we talked about before, with the housing crisis and so few affordable housing options, the single parents may be first attracted to our program specifically for, being able to pay a reasonable 30% rate, as 30% of their income rate for rent for a couple of years. And so we conduct a biopsychosocial, we have some longer conversations. And what we're really trying to assess in those conversations upon those interviews is readiness for change. And so we found that an applicant who, yes, probably does need housing, because we all do, but is ready to and willing and wants to engage in that more rigorous case management, that goal setting. So that would show up for our residents or the applicants in terms of either maybe they verbalize a goal upon the interview, or they can articulate, something about their life that they specifically want different. So it does go hand in hand without accountability. There is hopefully some demonstrated awareness around something that they want to change. And maybe they've either have an idea of what they want. I want to go back to school. I want to get a degree. This is the kind of life that I want. And so that's helpful. So we would be assessing for at least preparation stage of change, I would say, for the most likely, for the highest likelihood of success and being able to engage in the goal setting the way that we have it structured.
Right. So basically what we're doing is we're making sure that we're setting SMART goals where the participant is they're setting goals that they're comfortable with, that they can actually attain. They're confident that they can attain these goals. So whether we're referring to it as accountability or readiness for change, the participant is in the lead of pursuing this goal. Correct. So we're going to stop briefly to look at the Q&A box for more questions.
Yeah, definitely. So we do have a series of questions. So one I wanted to, this has to do with language. So I think Charmaine, this can be for you first, and then anyone else can chime in. Can you give me an example of how you described your work or the kind of language you use with the client? Like when we say self-sufficiency, it can imply that they are not. And do you work with folks once a crisis has happened in a way that a client is more open to coaching?
I may need you to repeat that question just because there's like multiple things in that.
Yes, there are like two parts.
So in terms of, I think the first part of it is how do we describe our services, or how do we describe the tools?
It looks like how you describe your work or the kind of language you use with the client. And I think kind of how do we discuss self-sufficiency and, how do we maybe, because it can imply that they are not. So what's that balance?
Yeah. I think, so, we were brought onto the Choice Project for a very specific task, which is workforce development and upskilling, as well as connecting residents to the resources. So first with an understanding, like, what is the role? What is the purpose? Why were we brought into this community, right? And so that helps us think about how do I then translate that work to the participants that we're working with. And we essentially say that we are from Empath. We are a team of mentors. Our job is to help you think about career opportunities, to help you plan, if you're interested in a job, what that might look like, think about some educational training that you're interested in. So we try to be very specific, like give real details. I don't want to just say we're workforce development program because that really doesn't tell you anything, right? I think what we do is we're more specific. We're here to support you in creating a plan and create goals around perhaps that looks like finding a job. Are you interested in finding job training? We do some financial management. So we're very clear. These are the things that we can do when we explain our services. When it comes to self-sufficiency, I don't necessarily, if we did use the self-sufficiency word, I would break it down very clear for the participant. But I don't normally say that in my first meeting necessarily. I think that can feel out of reach. It can feel really overwhelming, a little disconnected. And so at least in the bridge, because we have a career pillar that talks about these levels of AMI, I sort of just start with my job is to help you think about where do you see yourself for yourself and for your family. When you think about stability, what does that look like for you? If you had a magic wand and challenges weren't really in place, tell me about that future. And what would that, what kind of career and what could that salary be like for you? And so I start from there. And once I get to know that family a little bit more, then I can come in with information and say, thank you for all of this great information. I'm wondering if you'd like to know a little bit more about how we might coach someone around career advancement or like stability. You spoke a little bit about stability and what it takes to live in Boston with this salary. Are you interested to learn a little bit more? Are you interested in, so I don't go faster than what the client is ready for. I kind of just start to gauge where they are and then determine how much infusion of like, that conversation we integrate. Because not everybody is ready for that conversation. I think we just have to be very careful. It also depends on the type of program you are. So we have a program CFO that is specific to guiding people about self-sufficiency jobs, right? Like someone applies for that particular program, so they come in ready for that. I have to be respectful that of our 500 families, not everybody might be ready for that conversation. So we just have to be a little bit thoughtful about our approach. I hope that answers the question. Please let me know if I.
Yeah, I think so. And then the second part is, I think, speaks to, do you work with folks who are in crisis in a way that you work with clients who might be more open to coaching? So I think it's that balance between maybe, where that person's at or what's going on in their life and how does that play out in your approach?
Yes, you can never really know when someone's going to come in your door in a state of crisis, right? So I think we have an open door policy. Our approach is the same in terms of trying to take that crisis moment into a coachable moment. So obviously I won't just problem solve in the moment. We want to be trauma sensitive. We want to listen. We want to validate. And then see if there might be a way to then integrate a shift of how might we work together to then, coach in this moment. Can this crisis be turned into a goal? Or is this just a moment of like, well, let's take a step back and understand this a little bit and learn from this and then move on. So we definitely do try to be thoughtful when it comes to crisis management. Every opportunity that we have with a participant, we try to be intentional. So is this is this a moment where we could build more relationship and rapport, right? So for example, our team, we work in the community. And so one of the things we say also is, I just spoke to someone as I stepped out the door. I saw this person I hadn't seen in like 2 months. Well, I took this opportunity to like talk to them. And in that 5 minutes, I tried my best to even just talk about, oh, I remember this goal that you shared with me. So I think every moment, whether it's a crisis or not a crisis, as a mentor, we really try to think about what are some mentoring we can apply in that moment, whether it's relationship building, whether it's reminding them our services exist, whether it's like goal review, whatever it is.
Ginger, thank you, Charmaine. Thank you for that response. Full of information. Teachable moments is very important.
Yeah,
Ginger?
no, we definitely have more questions. So I actually do want I'll pitch this to you, Sandy, and then you can kind of field it out. But always questions around kind of lack of engagement or maybe barriers. So I'm gonna actually combine 2 questions here. What happens if a client consistently does not meet their goals or is disengaged?
Well, for shelter programs, our shelter programs, we have pretty reinforced guidelines from our funders, what the participants' obligations are. It's a requirement, it's a program requirement. So there are accountability measures that will have to be taken for participants who are refusing or unable to participate and fulfill those requirements. We really I personally don't like to use punitive measures working with participants, so we try to always find a way to work or to create new goals so that they can actually fulfill those requirements, so they can remain in the program. We're here to provide supportive services, so we're doing ourselves a great disservice when we're being punitive and putting them at risk of losing their shelter benefits. So again, we just try to regroup, refocus, identify what the barrier is and how can we get over it through creating new goals.
Yeah, all right. I'm wondering too then, maybe Brisbane Center and then Warren Village, because engagement always comes up in conversations, and I think we can always learn different ideas, so.
I'm very new to the program, so a lot of the information that I have is from our previous mentors, and I know that a lot of times engagement does sometimes after our participants come through the door there in the program, then they self-resolve and are able to find housing and have their jobs. A lot of that, sometimes they fall off because they no longer have the time commitment. They feel like, if I have to meet with my mentor again, that's going to cut out the time that I could be doing X, Y, Z. And so that does often happen. As this is a long-term program, that sometimes the participants feel that there's no need for that because they feel like their issues have been resolved.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. So, and I think it was Sandy that used the phrase regroup or reframe, rephrase. So that's a good coaching technique. So if you think about where someone is, they may not be able to reach that particular goal, but to reframe and to refocus that coaching relationship is ideally where we like to go. Ultimately, right to self-determination is the individual's right to be able to say, nope, I'm not going to participate, so they can exit the program. So we want to honor that. The challenge here as a shelter is if they refuse that and their time here at the shelter is finally expired, they end up finding themselves back out in an environment that is not very pleasant, palatable. So perhaps, and I too, like you, Sandy, I don't like to see punitive measures. Sometimes that's the pinch that gets folks refocused and to re-engage. But ideally, we'd like to work first with folks on how can we reframe, refocus, and re-engage.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for your responses. We're really coming close to the end of our time, so I'll just ask one more question for all the panelists today. If you were to share a report with us on your work, what outcomes would you want to highlight that may not be obvious or that the report might not be able to really show? What impact of using this intentional model may be harder to see on paper? Starting with Leslie, Charmaine, and then David and Janine.
So I was going to say, and this kind of actually fills into some other questions that I think were asked as well. I think for us, we've talked about the cliff effect. For a program like ours, what's sometimes is difficult about trying to show increased income. It's not the same as increased earning potential. We don't have residents, even though it is considered a long-term program, I suppose, if a person can live there 2 to 3 years, comparatively speaking. And yet for a family or a person who wants to complete a degree program or get additional training, and then kind of have to stair step up still, do stackable degrees or have some experience. And somebody was asking earlier about self-sufficiency too. And so as a program who uses self-sufficiency, like in our mission, like this is what we do, it's very tricky. We have to break that down and say, yeah, self-sufficiency defined by like the people, like the funders is like, you're no longer receiving any government benefits, or you don't need to receive any sort of like benefit or subsidy. And yet if you're a single parent, or not a single parent, if you're a married parent, a couple parent, that cost of childcare is thousands of dollars, right? And so we're managing the cliff effect, and we're managing the fact that it is not actually a failure in our program to still be relying on subsidies and to still need that. In fact, it makes a lot of sense. And so it's this balance of increased earning potential. This person's got a degree in a specific career pathway that will get them where they want to be eventually, even if it's years after they've exited our program or graduated. We do have a really lovely system of alumni, and we've grown our network, our alumni network support in that way, so that we can actually track those long-term goals and see like where people are 5 to 10 years after program. Because even getting a degree, even if they accomplish a bachelor's degree, right, and they move up in that education pillar on the bridge, it would not be beneficial, and it doesn't always work that it's going to co-align with like a $65,000 a year salary, which is what they would need to be self-sufficient. And so that's very difficult to demonstrate to our funders. That's the piece of paper that you really have to kind of pull back and say that.
Thank you, Leslie. Yes. David?
I will.
Oh, Charmaine, that's fine.
So I would say, this is speaking from behalf of my team, because we actually also we do a lot of data and a lot of numbers for HUD. I think my team and I wish the process was a little bit more evident and could be recorded a little bit differently, right? So process, the work and time it takes for mobility mentoring to develop, or mobility mentors to develop relationship with participants, like that hard work and time. The amount of planning it works to create groups and initiatives and projects for our participants, the time it takes to find resources in the community and making those really solid partnerships, the time it takes to train staff, especially when shifting from case management to mobility mentoring. Like that takes a significant amount of time that could affect the way in which you report on this data. And the length of time it takes participants to be ready to reach a goal, the different iterations of goals that maybe a participant needs to do before it actually is finalized. So I think process has always been difficult for us to figure out how to highlight and report on that is balanced and respected in the same way as numbers are.
Dave and I have spent a lot of time actually talking about this topic, and a lot of what we feel is that we can't, we're not able to significantly measure self-esteem. Did you want to speak about that?
Yeah,
I can talk about what it looks like.
Yeah, so we use the Rosenberg self-esteem scale and measure, changes in self-esteem. But there are other intangibles that I think we struggle to measure. I think I saw in the chat box, how do you measure the impact upon future generations of children? So we have second and third generation folks that have been homeless that come back. We also have some that have made some good success. Be looking for some videos that are coming out from us soon about some of those stories. But before we end, I know we're close on time. One of the metaphors that we've used, it has to do with Maslow's hierarchy. So you start at the base of basic needs. We think in terms of climbing. What is that mountain that folks need to climb? What is their best goal that they might be focused on? And then how do they co-labor or work along with a coach to be able to achieve success as they climb that mountain? What are the tools they need to be able to reach the next ladder? So self-actualization, self-sufficiency, sometimes those are often overused words, but what is it that they mean to that individual, and to focus on what it means for them and to coach them in that direction as they keep climbing that mountain toward what Maslow or what Bandura might call self-actualization.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for your responses, well-informed and seasoned responses. We're all better for the information that you shared with us today. So thank you to Leslie Bailey from Warren Village, David Cooper and Janine Adrian from the Brisbane Center, and Charmaine Lujeres from Empath for joining our Mobility Mentoring and Supportive Housing Programs conversation today. Thank you to all our attendants who tuned in today's conversation. To learn more about Empath and the Exchange, or if you're interested in becoming a member, please go to our website. We posted information in the chat for you. And once again, thank you everyone and have a great day.
Thank you.